Why is it that when Redditors mention the far right they cite politicians and legislation, but when they mention the far left it is random people on Twitter? If you're asking about the US, the current incarnation of the Republican Party provides a huge number of examples of far right and reactionary politicians, and also some who need to pretend to be much further to the right than they are to avoid primary challenges, including many in positions of great power. Who are the powerful far left politicians in the US today? There are plenty of people that are labeled as such by the right, but the actual left tend to find those characterizations utterly laughable. The idea that, say, Biden or Obama or Schumer or Pelosi are far left activists is just absurd and moronic. There is no far left representation in America because leftism is about anti-capitalism, and pretty much every politician we have, including Democrats, is a capitalist. Even Bernie is soft for an anti-capitalist. The narrative for Republicans is that their politicians will protect us against Democrat leftism, which doesn't exist, and the narrative for Democrats is that their liberalism is as far left as it gets and will protect us against conservatism, which it can't because it's capitalist. Because there isn't a parliamentary left in the US, and this is also the trend in other countries. Far right is transforming America using the political system to match Christofascist desires to strip rights and establish a one-religion state. Right-wingers are upset and afraid when their familiar culture is challenged, being racist or homophobic, so they get some of the quirkiest weirdos on Twitter to show how the left is destroying America and replacing white people. The Great Replacement Theory, sports.yahoo.com. Tucker Carlson embraces Great Replacement 035147356.html. Like who? There's your answer. The far left has little political voice in the US, while the far right enjoys positions of influence and power and is actually threatening our democracy. There is no left equivalent of Tucker Carlson or Marjorie Taylor Greene. Because the far right are often governing parties or strong opposition parties with a heavy parliamentary presence in several Western nations, think Hungary's E.M. Orban, the Republican Party, or Le Pen's Front National in France, while far left parties are either non-existent or firmly belong in the fringe Joe category. Most leftist parties are usually just liberals. Liberalism and leftism are different. Both tend to be socially liberal, hence the modern confusion, especially in our modern age of culture war nonsense, but their economic policies should be vastly different. Most modern parties that are labeled as liberals or leftists tend to follow a similar neoliberal economic policy as right-wing parties, hence leftists air their grievances online because they don't really have parties or movements representing them, as it's hard to organize a strong political party when your ideals and goals are in direct opposition to the corporate and capitalist class that finances everything. Because they cannot cite an actual mainstream person or elected official, and so they point to any random person and pretend that is comparable. They are making bad faith arguments because reality is in their side. The far left has zero representation in US politics or legislation. They don't have any examples of far left politicians or legislators to give. The only two frequently cited are Bernie Sanders and AOC, both of which have shown themselves to be pretty spineless center-left cowards. Of course, you also have the cranks who claim Joe Biden is a far-left communist destroyer of freedom. But I think those people are pretty easily ignored. Cause contrary to what the right narrative is, most governments are right-wing. Their political opponents are usually centric at best. There are literally no far-left members in any branch of national government. The fact that people equate Bernie, Ayok, Omar center-left in any other country, or Biden Pelosi classic liberal center-right with far-left shows how far to the right our government has moved. Because the US doesn't have a true far-left movement in any real capacity of power, our far right wants to overthrow the government because their candidate lost an election. Our far right wants a strongman dictator. Our far right stole a Supreme Court nomination from Obama and rammed Amy Coney Barrett's nomination through, packing the court and using that power to legislate from the bench. Our far left wants everyone to have affordable healthcare and education. The two are not the same. Reddit is the wrong place to ask this question. You might as well ask lions if sheep taste good. I'd answer with more detail, but again Reddit. You will be answered only by leftists with a subtle to not so subtle slant. Unless you get answers from all walks you're being influenced. Reddit isn't a good place for that. Proof will be in the downvote. I'd suggest asking a far left, right, and far right platform. Otherwise you're only reaping from Reddit. Left, far left, with occasional exception. Because there aren't really any far left politicians. In Australia it's mostly just a couple of local governments in Victoria. There are some loonies on the left, but nothing far left. First off, that's not true. People mention people like installing all the time. However, it's important to know that there are more far-right politicians within our collective human history than there are politicians who are on the far left. There are several reasons for this, but one of them is pretty simple, and that is that America actually removes those politicians from power and installs a puppet dictatorship in that country instead, so there's not a lot of examples. One not sure if that's entirely true might just be your experience too, because the left's influence is primarily cultural rather than strictly political. They prefer to influence people organizations via activism, protests, and other forms of pressure rather than the ballot box, and have been quite successful in this regard. 3. Because most redditors are American, and although there is some left-wing political representation in the US, there isn't much of it. Confirmation bias is a powerful thing, beware of its traps. Usually authority takes the place of a charismatic person, and the far right is currently more authoritarian-leaning while the far left is more individualist. They're both dumb IMO. If you need to tell people you belong to a group, you're probably having a hard time formulating opinions of your own.